Hi, everyone. I'm Stan Mallow, the Paranormal Yacker. My guests on today's show are Bill and Jaci Kousoulas, authors of Bridging the Tragedy, Silver Linings in the Mysterious Ohio River Valley. Bill and Jaci, welcome to Paranormal Yacker.
Good
Thank
evening.
you. Thank
Thanks
you.
for having us.
On December 15, 1967, trauma erupted in West Virginia as the small river town of Point Pleasant had just experienced the deadliest bridge collapse in U.S. history. Could you describe what happened on that horrific bridge collapse?
So at 5:04 p.m., December 15th, really at the beginning of serious winter conditions on a Friday night, 10 days before Christmas, the Silver Bridge, which spanned between Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and Kanawha, Ohio. It had stood there for 39 years with a defect in one of its high bars that didn't manifest until the night of the bridge disaster. The bridge was packed with traffic headed towards West Virginia and headed towards Ohio. Both lights were red, and the cold conditions and the humidity coupled with this I-bar fracturing caused that bridge to go down like a domino effect. And it tilted to the left and dumped half of its passengers into the icy cold river, tilted to the right, dumped the rest of them into the river, and then the bridge collapsed on top of those unfortunate people underneath. 46 people passed away in the disaster. And to date, it is still the worst bridge disaster in terms of fatalities in the United States history.
Before the bridge collapse, scores of area residents experienced a year-long barrage of paranormal phenomena. What was some of the paranormal phenomena reported by the residents?
There was all kinds of paranormal phenomena that took place for the 13 months prior to the bridge disaster. Primarily, it's been known as the Mothman. And Mothman was a creature that was sighted in Clendenin, West Virginia, a few days prior to the first sighting in Point Pleasant. But in Point Pleasant, there were two couples who were out, young married couples in their late teens, driving in an area called the TNT. And the TNT is about 11 miles north of Point Pleasant on Route 62. And this was an area where dynamite was manufactured for the World War II efforts, hence the name, the TNT area. And as they were out cruising around, this place had been overgrown and shut down for 25 years by this point. They were astounded to see a being that they described as a black winged type of a figure with piercing red eyes, scared them half to death. They hightailed it back into the car and down Route 62 at speeds approaching 100 miles an hour. This creature actually chased them and flew and hit the roof several times on the way into town, but then disappeared once they got to town. And that was the first sighting in Point Pleasant of what came to be known as Mothman. But earlier on, in the very early sightings, they simply referred to it as the bird.
The paranormal incidents that plagued the area for 13 months halted abruptly when the bridge collapsed. What conclusions, if any, or thoughts did those who investigated the matter come to as to why this occurred, that a tragedy would result in the ending of paranormal activity in this area of Appalachia?
The way it's been described to us is there is a gentleman in Point Pleasant who is a very prominent individual, not just in Point Pleasant, but also in the paranormal community now. His name is Jeff Wamsley. Jeff runs the Mothman Museum, and he also is the co-founder of the Mothman Festival, which is an annual event which basically celebrates the paranormal occurrences, not the bridge disaster, of course, because that's not something to celebrate per se. But the way Jeff describes it is that all this paranormal activity, and we've only talked about Mothman so far, but there were also UFOs, there were lights in the sky, there was an entity that came to be known as Indrid Cold, who was associated with the same time frame in the same region, who made his appearances known throughout West Virginia as well. All these things took place along with poltergeist activity, men in black, cattle mutilations, things like this. But when the bridge disaster happened, all of the attention in the community was focused upon saving whatever they could of the people who had fallen into the river and then basically recovering from the trauma of the bridge disaster. So there were, a handful of sightings that would continue to occur over the next several years, but the concentration of those sightings was never anything close to the apex that it was back between 66 and 67, partly because of the bridge disaster taking the center stage, and then also because the paranormal activity really subsided subsided to a very large degree.
In 2020, phenomenology research professionals began developing a plan to conduct a scientific study about the after effects of the Silver Bridge disaster, the associated paranormal phenomena, and as incredible as it sounds, the good things that have come to pass in the region since the late 1960s. The two of you developed several relationships in the community and constructed the outline of the present study to learn about the good outcomes that developed from the unexplained phenomena and the Silver Bridge disaster. Why this interest in what happened? One that led you to writing about it.
I'll start off and then I'm going to pass to my wife because she describes that very well. I was really pretty taken by the Mothman Prophecies movie when I saw it the very first time in 2003. And I began slowly kind of researching the whole phenomenon. I had no prior knowledge of Mothman 20 years ago. The movie kicked it off for me. But after watching the movie and learning that it was based on some historical events, I decided to take it upon myself to begin studying. I've kind of been a terminal student for a large segment of my life, and I really got my teeth sunk into the whole Mothman phenomenon, began learning as much as I could by buying John Keel's books, buying other similar researchers' books, learning as much as I possibly could about the story, the myth, whatever we want to call it. But in 2016, by then I had been a graduate student again for about 5 years, balancing a full-time career, and we were raising our granddaughter. So we didn't have a lot of time for just the two of us. So Jackie suggested we take a vacation, and she was a little surprised when I mentioned, why don't we go to Point Pleasant, West Virginia? Because typically we'd gone to places you would consider to be more resort oriented or maybe even kind of tropical in ways, but I chose Point Pleasant, and I guess I'll let her take it from this point.
Sure.
So when we went to Point Pleasant, I said, sure, I'll go to Point Pleasant. I mean, I had seen the movie. I wasn't nearly as enthralled with it all as my husband was. I had some opinions about Mothman, and then we had the sightings in Chicago, which had also piqued my interest, but I kind of related all to disaster. So I wasn't sure about it all. So I'm like, yeah, I'll go, but I would like to go see Serpent Mound if we're going to go east. So we went to Serpent Mound. We left Serpent Mound and headed to Point Pleasant. So when we got to Gallipolis, Ohio, is where we stayed. Went over the bridge, got to Point Pleasant. It was after 5 o'clock, so the museum had already closed. So we were walking down the street. Well, first we had to go see Mothman, so we went and saw the statue. We were walking down the street, head towards the Ohio River, actually to the point where the two rivers meet. And we walked past a restaurant, and there was this little lady standing in the window. I saw her, and we just kept walking. I said to Bill, I think that lady wants us to come in and talk to her. And he's like, no, let's just go see what. I said, no, I think she wants us to come in and talk to her. So we turned around, went back in, and we were talking. Went in and spoke to her. Her name was Carolyn Harris. She was the owner of the Mothman Diner, aka Harris's Steakhouse. We were talking with her. She said, I'll talk to you about anything that you want to know about the paranormal stuff. You know, the bird, she called it the bird, but I won't talk about the bridge. And we didn't learn till later that her son passed away on the bridge. He was 2 years old, and her husband, that they were separated at the time, went down with the bridge. And that's why she didn't want to talk about the bridge. So we went back to that diner every day that we were in Point Pleasant, and we just grew to love this lady. And we had only known her for 4 or 5 days, however long we were there in Point Pleasant. But she was so kind and so friendly and so willing to stop what she was doing and talk to us every time we went in there and answer any questions that we had, regarding all of it. She just won us over. And we also met a couple other people during that visit that we were so welcomed there. And every time we go back to Point Pleasant, we make new friends. We're never mistreated by anyone anywhere. So that's why Point Pleasant.
Could you, Bill and Jackie, tell me about some of the good outcomes that developed after the bridge tragedy?
So what we did is we applied a methodology that's known as grounded theory. And in grounded theory, the idea behind that is that it's based upon conversational interviews, and that reality is co-constructed through conversation. It's not based upon statistics, it's based upon personal experience and the interpretation of that experience. So what we did is we interviewed 11 people from the community of the greater Ohio River Valley. 9 of them were primarily from the Point Pleasant, West Virginia / Gallipolis, Ohio community, which is right there straddling the river. 2 of them were from the Charleston area, which is about 50 or 60 miles away, but they had some some paranormal phenomena that they encountered. So they were very valuable to the study as well. What we did is by interviewing them with the same sets of questions about the bridge disaster and about the paranormal phenomena, we were able to come up with what we call codes in grounded theory processing. We took each one of the interview statements and pulled meaning units out of each one of those statements, and we began to categorize those meaning units into one big pool of over 2,200 meaning units, which is a lot. We use software to kind of assist in this, but it's a very manual process. From that point, we took everything and deduced it down into categories, or what are known as focused codes. And the focused code list came down to 110. So here we filtered from 2,200 down to 110, but we needed to get way more specific than that. So in order to determine the dimensions of post-traumatic growth, we had to go from 110 categories to 15 themes. And of those 15 themes, I'm happy to share with you what they are. I'll have to refer to our book that I have right here because I don't have them all memorized just yet. I'll go ahead and just read the codes off to you. What we came up with for the post-traumatic growth dimensions was a greater appreciation for life, a sense of community, entrepreneurialism, family, gratitude, memorial, optimism, patience, perseverance, personal development, perspective taking, positive reflections, preparedness, responsibility, and spiritual development. And that's all in alphabetical order. It's not necessarily by the amount of just how prevalent each one of the codes was. That's just alphabetically listed.
You, Bill, completed your doctorate in psychology, specializing in positive psychology, the science of what goes right in life. Most of your doctoral research related to post-traumatic growth, the good outcomes that we gain by navigating our challenging life experiences. Were you always interested in that subject?
I've been interested in that subject for about the last 25 years. Primarily, the dissertation that I wrote in order to complete my doctorate was based upon post-traumatic growth. That was when I formally began the studies of it, at the doctoral level. But prior to that, I was very interested in watching people and being a person who's overcome. We all have our own demons, our own struggles, our own life challenges. Nobody gets out of this experience unscathed, right?
Agreed.
So having been a person who's been able to overcome some obstacles of my own, and then having a community of others that I know who have also overcome some things, when it was time to go back to school and begin working on the dissertation, what I ended up doing was I had been through a divorce, a previous marriage that didn't work as well as my marriage to Jackie does. And during that process, the court system itself and the experience that divorce took on a life of its own. For a marriage I was in for 2 years, a divorce process lasted 6.5 years. No kids, no real estate to divide up. But because of the games that were played and the way the legal process works out, it was incredibly stressful. And I was able to convince my committee when it came to dissertation that this was a trauma-producing condition. So they said, okay, prove it. So I set out to do that, and I interviewed 9 gentlemen who had been through a divorce of similar circumstances in their late 30s, early 40s. That's when I went through mine. We uncovered so much growth that it just really galvanized my approach and my desire to be able to look at things that are catastrophic in nature. They could be natural disasters, they could be bridge disasters, they could be the legal process, they could be the surprise loss of a loved one, something we just don't anticipate, things that we would expect to sink us, that somehow we rise out of the ashes and we grow, not just in spite of the circumstances, but because we've been through them, and we can share them with other people. So taking that passion and coupling it with the Mothman and the bridge disaster was just a natural extension of my desire, Jackie's desire, to shed some light on the good things that have happened in a community that we've come to embrace and consider as a second home.
Have you, Bill and Jackie, done any follow-up interviews with those you originally spoke with? And if you did, are their attitudes and feelings the same, or have they changed?
We haven't really done any follow-up interviews, but we've spoken with different people that we interviewed and got their feedback, and it's been all positive. There was a couple, or at least one person for sure that I can think of right off the top of my head, that really was very leery of wanting to do an interview at all. And she's the only one really that cut stuff out of her interview that she felt she shouldn't have said, that was very proud to have been part of the process. So, and we got that feedback from a lot of people. people. Almost everybody was very happy with the result of the book.
Bill and Jackie, you debuted your book at the annual Mothman Festival in West Virginia and were also guest speakers at it. What was the feedback you received from festival attendees?
It was good. It was positive. We presented Saturday evening at 6 o'clock, and the festival was shutting down at that point. As far as the vendors and things like that on Main Street, people came back on Sunday after hearing our presentation, wanted to buy the book and wanted to talk to us more about these types of things. It was a very positive experience. We also put out there that we were looking for a new project. And when talking about some different ideas that we had some really profound moments with some people. I mean, West Virginia is full of all kinds of stuff.
Some people believe that the Mothman had tried to warn people of the Silver Bridge collapse. Others are of the opinion that the Mothman caused it. What's your take on the involvement or non-involvement of Mothman in regard to the bridge collapse in Point Pleasant?
As you can imagine, Stan, I've given this a lot of thought. And having studied both the movie as well as John Keel's work and other authors, gentlemen by the name of Andrew Colvin, that basically the Mothman Prophecies, which is the title of the movie and the book, is based largely in John Keel's experience of having received all types of really cryptic types of messages that he felt were either channeled through one individual he was having conversations with, or were perhaps people that this individual was in the same room with who handed the telephone to him. But the long and short of it was Keel received information telling him that Martin Luther King was going to be assassinated, that Robert Kennedy was going to be assassinated, that the Pope was going to be assassinated. Well, obviously the first two things did happen. The third one, the attempt happened, but it was thwarted. So that Pope's life was spared, but somebody did try to kill him. He received all kinds of information, and he also believed there was going to be some type of a disaster happening within the region that was due to all this different paranormal activity and these prophecies he was receiving. But what he never did was to be able to put that information together with the bridge. And he kind of held himself responsible for that. He felt as close as he was investigating for the 13 months that he did and learning as much as he had and receiving all this information that he really should have been able to warn the people of Point Pleasant. But those messages never came to him directly or completely. He had to fill in the blanks. He had to do guesswork, etc. So I would say from a legendary standpoint, it's very romantic to correlate Mothman having warned of the bridge coming, because Mothman warned of all these assassination attempts and different things that were actually did take place, or close to them. Things like them did take place. There were plane crashes and things of that nature as well. So I don't believe that the Mothman had a direct causation in the bridge going down. I think if there were any type of a connection there, that it would have been more in the sense of trying to warn that something was going on, but maybe not being able to convey that information directly, kind of coming at it sideways and never really delivering it in time to be able to spare those lives, if that makes sense.
What is your hope, Bill and Jackie, that readers of Bridging the Tragedy take away with them after reading it?
When people read this book that have suffered any type of trauma, that they take hope with them, that they see that no matter how devastating something can be to your life or your community or your family or your friends, that there is hope for a better tomorrow.
What really inspired us to write this book, Jackie had talked about our first trip to Point Pleasant, was that we knew that Carolyn, and she touched our lives. We felt like she was a long lost relative. She gave us her phone numbers. We went back, we had our mountaintop, week in Point Pleasant, went back to our workaday careers and responsibilities. And I went back to school as well. And when my school break happened that fall on Christmas Eve, we were headed to Jackie's mom's to celebrate Christmas dinner. And in the car, I said, Carolyn gave us her phone numbers. I would like to give her a call and see if she'd let me write her story, knowing that she didn't want to talk about the bridge. But I just kind of figured I'm going to at least try. So she said, that's a good idea. Why don't we call her after the holidays? So we decided to call her after the first of the year. The day we met Carolyn, we met a gentleman by the name of Mark Griffith. He was also in the restaurant, and he became a friend too. We've communicated stayed with him regularly ever since, and he's in our book. He contacted us on Facebook on Christmas Day and said, Bill, Jackie, Carolyn had a heart attack. She's in the hospital. The next day, he said, I hate to tell you, Carolyn passed away. So this lady that we met, who we just fell in love with, that the day that I decided and told my wife that I wanted to work with Carolyn and see if she'd talk to us, which I'd hoped that she would, it never came to pass. And of course, we were just devastated, just crushed, because this lady who felt like a relative was gone, and this dream that we had to tell her story was gone as well. So we thought. But over the course of the next several years, we continued to kind of keep the hope alive. We kept traveling back to Point Pleasant. We became friends, good friends with Jeff Walmsley and other people in the community. And as I finished my doctorate, I was ready for my next challenge. And we came up with this research plan that married our love for psychology with our love for Point Pleasant. And so the hope, like Jackie mentioned, is to be able to give other people, number one, to share the love that we have for the people of Point Pleasant and the story, the legend of Mothman and the bridge disaster. But more importantly, really to be able to bring people hope in the context to some degree of the paranormal, but really in real life lived experience, to be able to say, hey, it doesn't matter how bad it's gotten. Look at what happened to these people. Look how their lives are today. Was there pain? Absolutely. Would they have rather avoided it? No question. But look who they are today as a result of living through it.
Has your involvement with the writing of Bridging the Tragedy affected your own personal lives in any way? If it has, how has it been affected?
It has affected my life. I'm just trying to figure out exactly what. Well, for one thing, I will say we never would have went to the Mothman Festival. At least my husband and I would not have gone together because he hates crowds. I get my energy from people. He loses his energy with people. And that experience in itself was just phenomenal. It was just unbelievable. Best time that we've had in a long time just to be part of the Mothman Festival. What it's done also is we've made some really good friends and met some really good people. And when you're interviewing people for the very first time, you don't know these people at all. And then you're following up with them and you're going back and meeting them and giving them the book and talking about it. You just grow close from this kind of thing. I mean, it's such a sensitive subject. There was a lot of emotion in a lot of the interviews and people were really brought back. I mean, it sounded like it was just like yesterday to some of them. One of the ladies, when she was talking, Bill even said that to her. He says, as you're sitting here talking, it looks like to me that this this just happened yesterday. And she's like, yeah, it really was. It was just shocking. It just made you feel so much closer and everybody seems more human that is involved with the project.
I'm sure it had to be very cathartic for those who spoke with you. From what you're telling me, it was good for them. And it's pretty good for your readers to learn about what's going on in one's life. And there is that silver lining, which is great. Should viewers of Paranormal Yacker want to buy Bridging the Tragedy, Silver Linings in the Mysterious Ohio River Valley, how can they do that?
They can buy it at Amazon, on Amazon.com. Just Google or just put in our name, Kousoulas, Bill Kousoulas, or Bridging the Tragedy. Not very many books will come up. It'll be ours. Or you can contact us on our Facebook page, Phenomenology Research Professionals. We can ship a book to anybody that does not use Amazon. It's $20 on Amazon and we'll do the free shipping too. So it's flat $20 for people within the United States.
It's only a couple dollars more to go to Canada. It's not expensive up there either.
Bill and Jackie, I thank you for being my guest on Paranormal Yacker. Much success is wished you with your book.
Thank you, Stan. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. This is Stan Mallow, the Paranormal Yacker. I hope you enjoyed the interview you just watched. To be sure, you're amongst the first to receive new interviews when they're released and to have access to previous ones, subscribe to my free YouTube channel. To do that, all you have to do is press the subscribe button on your screen.